Go. So again, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at the prestigious Nuffield Australia conference. Like Don mentioned, I'm a 2013 Nuffield Scholar and my study topic was understanding and utilisation of flavour parameters in stone fruit. Quite a lengthy title, but I assure you I'll be able to explain it. At this stage, I'd just like to acknowledge Woolworths as my sponsor, who took the time to invest in me, in Nuffield Australia for allowing me to undertake the journey I did. I also want to acknowledge my wife and my family, my business partners and the many professionals that I've met during my travels. So for me, the current issue that I see in the stone fruit industry is basically the perception of stone fruit is pretty poor due to its eating quality. This is not an uncommon sight that we see. Unsatisfactory performance of and the variability of stone fruit within the supply chain. Like Don mentioned, in terms of my role within our business structure is I'm a varietal evaluator. We started this process 8 years ago with approaching nurseries to get 60 varieties. That was our start. To date, we would have 1,100 varieties sitting in my test site, which I have to evaluate every year. So during the summertime when I should be out picking fruit, irrigating and fertilising, I'm actually just eating fruit, just non-stop, 30 hours a week. I started thinking when I was looking at applying for a Nuffield scholarship, because I've been asked quite constantly about flavour. How do we get flavour back into stone fruit, and how do we get a better appreciation of stone fruit? So I thought, well, I just asked myself, can I link consumer eating patterns to stone fruit flavours and what profiles there are in retail marketing strategies? And when I talk profiles, flavour profiles, I'm actually talking about the acid levels in fruit. Stone fruit's changed over the last probably 10 to 15 years, where instead of having a normal classic or traditional peach or nectarine, you've actually got quite a range of eating styles out there, from the acid, traditional, low acid to sub-acid. And it's quite varied and is quite consumer specific. Some people like an acid type and some people like a sub-acid. And it's really hard to segment that into the marketplace because they're all just a yellow nectarine or a yellow peach. And I also thought, well, again, what are flavour parameters? How do we perceive flavour? And can that help in varietal selection to try and increase stone fruit consumption in Australia? And the aim of my study really was to understand stone fruit breeders' objectives, priorities and breedings, what's the role of consumer surveys and sensory testing, how do retailers increase sales, and what do we use and how do we use when we evaluate. And a personal aim for me, because I'm an evaluator, was really, how do I develop a way to objectively identify varieties that satisfy certain flavour parameters that consumers like. So the countries I visited over the last 18 months were many states in North America, some more than once, just to get an idea and an understanding more thoroughly. Canada, Israel, South Africa, London and southern France. And the critical observations I saw along my journey was really a lot of breeders are still palate-based, they're subjective. So when they taste a piece of fruit in their breeding programs, they're really making that decision then and there what tastes nice to them, and every breeder is different. The good thing is they are listening to growers. And if you look at the bottom pictures on the slide, the left-hand picture is a showcasing scenario in Sunworld in Bakersfield, California, and the picture on the right is from Zoga Genetics in Modesto, California. Both of these showcases give growers an opportunity to come and taste and look at the varieties themselves and make their own value judgments of what is good and what is bad, and give that feedback back to the breeders. So that gives them a good opportunity, and that eventually leads on to tree sales and more production, and hopefully with the right selections. But again, it's a very subjective type of measurement. The difference really that I saw between public and private breeders from around the world and all the institutions was generally they're both palate-based, they're both subjective. The difference being the public breeders are able to utilise more of the research universities and institutions that they're involved in to do a lot more consumer preferencing work, some sensory panel testing, and using more scientific equipment to make more objective measurements on the fruit characteristics. A lot more so than the private breeders. Again, many breeders and thousands of varieties. And the top 4 slides are just 4 breeders I met that I just selected for this slideshow. The top right-hand side is Laurence Maillard from southern France. Middle to the right is Alexander Boucher from AC Fruits in southern France. The middle person is Dr. Chuxian Chen from Byron, Georgia, who's just taken over as peach breeder. And the person on the left-hand side is Edu Bendor from Israel, who breeds quite a few different lines of plums, nashies and apples. And you can see in the bottom few slides that there's just a couple of varieties of the lines that I'm looking at. From the bottom left, you've got a red flesh peach. To the middle slide, you've got a dark red skin apricot. And then when you go to the last slide on the right-hand side, it's just a range of fruit that I saw in one of the more upper-class supermarkets in France called Grand Fraise. So when I go back to breeders, each breeder has the capability every year of selecting or breeding 15 to 20,000 selections every single year. Some breeders like Zaka Genetics do over 100,000. And out of those numbers, only 1 or 2% will potentially make commercial reality. So you can see there's a lot of varieties to choose from, and there's a lot of evaluation work to be done. And those 2 pictures of those, only those 2 varieties there is just some of the unique varieties that I see in my travels, let alone all the standard peaches, nectarines, plums, apricots, cherries, aprions, pluots, you name it, claries as well. They do everything. So it's just an amazing job that I do. I also saw good examples of partnerships, both in California and in the UK. The left-hand picture is a good friend of mine called Eric Wall from a company in California, Vasala, California, called Eric Wall, who's an evaluator similar to me. His evaluation farm, he would probably have a similar number of varieties to evaluate as well. He's very much closer to the breeders that I deal with. But his business that he is involved in and worked with has 4,000 acres of stone fruit planted, and they're not the largest stone fruit organisation in California. And so what they do is Eric is very critical in trying to determine and evaluate new lines so that the business partners in that organisation can plant the very best variety. And their motto of their business is flavours, flavour first. Flavour matters. So the key thing about that business structure was when I sat down with the marketing department and the sales team was really to understand how they treat their customer base, and it was really a one-on-one partnership, almost like a marriage. Every time they made a sale, there was a one-on-one commitment for that salesperson to follow the fruit sale all the way through the customer, get constant feedback, to keep tweaking the sale arrangement so that the consumer always had a good eating experience. And in the UK, I saw many retailers like Tesco's, Waitrose, Marks and Spencer. The bottom corner is again the person that Trent talked about, David Northcroft, is on the left-hand side of this bottom picture here, and his associate Amy Lance. Like Trent said, they have variety category managers in a lot of different divisions, not just stone fruit, but berries as well. The good example that I saw with that business model was they were actually looking at a breeder of stone fruit with a very specific acid profile. So it was quite a high acid line of fruit they were getting with high sugars. Very specific and very unique. And they were utilising that within that breeder's branding and marketing program to try and generate new sales for the future. I also looked at some new evaluation tools to help me in my current role. Currently, most of my evaluation tools are destructive, and so when I say that they're destructive, it means you have to destroy the fruit to take the measurements. So when you take a sugar reading, you've got to take a juice sample. When you do some acid readings, you've got to take a juice sample. To take firmness or pressure readings, you've got to puncture the fruit, so you're always destroying the fruit. The DA meter is a meter that has been used quite recently in scientific research circles in terms of measuring the decrease in the chlorophyll level of a piece of fruit. So typically as a piece of fruit ripens from say 4 to 5 weeks out from harvest, the chlorophyll level decreases, and that's inversely related to the production of ethylene. And we can also say that as fruit ripens and gets close to maturity, the ethylene production increases. So we can monitor and we can predict from 4 weeks out when we can harvest and at what stage we can harvest. So this is going to be a great tool in the future to know at what point we can harvest and get a better consistent maturity level in our fruit that we pick. Also identified some current gaps in evaluations. Like I said, most breeders look at sugar, but sugar isn't everything. It's easy to say, yeah, we want to have a nice sweet piece of fruit, but it's been clearly demonstrated to me that acid plays a huge role in the way people perceive the flavours coming through from the fruit, and also how the acid relates with the fruit in terms of post-harvest storage. So it was really pointed out to me that there needed to be a lot more testing done on acid, more regular testing, especially on the new varieties coming through the system. And the reason I have pH right next to the acid comment is one of the apple breeders from Washington State University has just said, hey, why don't you just do a pH reader? It might be just as quick and it's a very simple measurement. The problem with acid, to do an acid reading, is it is quite destructive, it's tedious, it's time consuming. So a pH may be a quick and simple way to get an easy reference. And so what I decided to do this last season that I've just gone through is starting to do a bit more work with acid and trying to relate it back to pH. I'm still in the process of trying to work out the relationship. And I also saw and got a better understanding of shelf testing. When I was with Tesco's only this year in June, I spent a lot of time with the Tesco's buyers just testing all the fruit that they pulled out of the supermarket shelves, testing for post-harvest, how it tasted when it's been sitting on the shelf. And it was just amazing the different comments we're all getting back, from really nice to not so nice. And it was quite funny because one customer brought some cherries straight off the packing line and tried to put it in the sample. And said, well, that's not really quite fair, because you get something tree ripe and putting it against something that's been in the shelves for probably a week to 2 weeks. And that's always been the issue. So that's just something that really sort of highlighted to me in my travels. So my recommendations going forward for the industry is to continue work on evaluating acid levels in certain types of fruit. Just like I said, it just kept popping up. You've got to do acid, you've got to do acid. And it's one thing I've avoided because I know how time consuming it is. So last year I started doing acid, and it's really interesting to look at the acid. Identifying sugar-acid ratio versus post-harvest storability. I really wanted to see how much difference the acid in a piece of fruit relayed back to the fruit's performance coming out of post-harvest. So doing the evaluation measurements off the tree, putting it in storage for 2 weeks, sitting it out at ambient temperature for about 3 days, just like the average consumer would, and then just seeing what it tasted like, and then doing the measurements afterwards as well. Also wanted to highlight some international work in volatile aroma profiling. Aromas is just another component for me that will influence the perception of flavour. I would even comment to say memories influence flavour just as much, but aroma is something that there's been a bit of work done in certain institutions around the world, and I just want to highlight the work that's been done in that sort of area. And I also want to be able to group my profiles. So when I was talking about before about how you've got your different flavour profiles in terms of acid, you've got your highly acid, you've got your traditional, you've got your low acid, your sub-acids. That's well and good, but we need to actually put them in groups. So all the new varieties coming through, we can link those new varieties within those groups for marketing purposes. Because there's no point me selling a variety which is quite acid to a consumer that only likes the sub-acid. So we need to be able to segment them somehow and have a bit more control of that from a marketing point of view. So this was just an example of a paper that I got from Canada, from the Vineland Innovation Research Centre, which is a good example of the middle blob, you could say, is just a grouping that I was talking about, and this is linked to genetic marking, but I would actually link it to flavour, to the acid profiles. And then what they're trying to do is they're overlaying volatile aroma compounds within those distinct types of apple types, and then later down the track they're going to overlay it with consumer preferences, just to see where the consumers actually, and what their appreciation is for the various volatiles that are coming through. Volatiles are something that I know that I can't do because it's quite expensive, quite time consuming, but it's something that the industry could possibly champion. Again, continued evaluation and benchmarking of varieties through to post-harvest. it's just seemed critical from all the from California to the UK that's what they're doing a lot more of, and that's what we need to do to make sure the end product, after it's gone through the supply chain, is still eating as good as what we're getting off the tree. And to continue consumer testing. The last consumer test was done in 2012, and they really pitted two flavour acid profiles against each other, one quite high acid variety against a low acid variety. And you could see in that study that there was certainly quite a difference between the appreciation, the consumer appreciation for both styles. However, as you brought the maturity up, as the riper both styles got, the more aligned those preferences became. So that became really critical. The more I can control the variation in maturity level of my fruit, then the better I'm going to get a consumer appreciation and repeat sale. So just one last highlight I just wanted to bring up to you. If you had the chance to buy stone fruit, where would you buy? And where would you buy more from? One of the things that really came home to me through my travels was buying local and buying fresh. And I suppose the area that really came home was in North America. And I thought it was a very apt subject because it kept popping up in CSE in Canada, popped up in our Global Focus program tours, and even on my own private studies. The advantage with buying local and buying fresh in America is a farmer or a grower within 4 hours has access to 80 million people. Now, Australia doesn't, so it's a little bit harder. But I know from my own farmers market experience, the people that come to us for fresh produce is just amazing. And we just had recently in the Riverland of South Australia, we had an international guest speaker called Desmond Lane come over and present to a grower association. And his main comment was, if we could get people to eat a piece of fruit off the tree at that same level from the retail supply chain, they would know just how good a piece of fruit eats. And really my last comment is, for me and for our business, flavours really matters. Thank you.